This presentation is brought to you by Arizona State University's Julianne Wrigley Global Institute of Sustainability and a generous investment by Julianne Wrigley.
What you see next is the modern world. Suddenly, we end up with 1492. We end up with needing resources from a much wider area, creating the technology to go and get them, creating the organization to go and get them, the East Indies companies, the armies over there, and so on and so forth. Now, one of the interesting things that happens here is that that is the era at which cities are actually dominant because they have the money. The princes have nothing. They borrow and they borrow and they borrow, and then it goes broke, and then they start all over again. What is important about this is that that is the introduction of market systems, that is, decentralized systems that become important, whereas the hierarchical systems that the original rulers come out of are losing in importance. So we see that sort of happening. This is a map that shows how this expands in the world, and I'm sorry that the visual images are not very easy in this particular room. This is the first time we tried this room, and it would be better if we could get them a bit sharper. But anyway, next big stage is that political and economic power get in cahoots. The cities and the princes get into a dependency relationship that allows the hierarchical system, the market system, and the centralized system to process information together. And I can give you at some point the reasons why that is systemically inevitable. It has nothing to do with these princes or with these cities, but from an information processing perspective, that is fundamental. So what we start doing is get intercontinental resource acquisition, but that also means that we get a different dynamic in which, little by little, the people at the periphery, just like in the case of the Roman Empire, start learning the tricks that were there in the center. And so unless the center can keep going faster and faster, they lose their power over the periphery. That's a lot of what you have seen after the Second World War with decolonization. So, at the same time, you see a shift in that period between 1600 and 1800, and in particular close to 1800, towards more and more industry. That becomes more important than agriculture. This is sort of how the world map changes. And then we get to a very crucial point. Around 1800, we have all over Europe a set of semi-revolutions exploding on us, whether this is the French Revolution or the ones that follow in Germany and in other places. The system is under such stress that I would argue that it would have collapsed, but for one thing. And the but for one thing is the increasing use of fossil energy. Suddenly, by tapping into coal and later oil, and inventing machines to use that energy in a more effective way, we give Western society a new lease of life. Because suddenly, we take away the energy constraints of our innovation potential. And suddenly, with the Industrial Revolution, you see that absolutely amazing spread of new innovations that are made possible because there are hardly any energy costs. And that ultimately drives our current system. That makes a couple of really important changes. In particular, that from that moment on, we have to keep expanding our total conceptual value space so that innovation becomes endemic. At the same time, innovation shifts from something that was driven by need to something that is driven by supply. If you go back in prehistory, and I gave you already the example of the Alexandrian steam engine, you go back even further, there is a 1,000-year time lag between Western Europeans knowing how to work iron and introducing the iron working all over the continent. What had to change is a complete new social structure. Bronze, which they had before, is something that's easy to control if you're the boss. There's only 4 or 5 places in Europe where you find it. So you can basically stifle the flow of bronze anytime you want. Iron you find anywhere, in any bog. So that's an information revolution which suddenly sort of decapitates the existing society. Now, I would argue that the society needs to lose control before that actually sees its resurgence. Where we are getting now is that in that dependency of ourselves on innovation, we have to go faster and faster and faster, and that's clearly what we've seen over the last 60 years. We get thereby also into our sustainability predicament. And one of my colleagues calls this, and this is something that economists detest, and I'm not doing it for anything else except that it will be a mnemonic for you, the biggest Ponzi scheme of all, because we have to go faster and faster and draw in more and more value by inventing to actually keep our system going and intact. And one of the questions that I think is a really interesting research question to raise, but which I haven't really explored, is in how far the explosion of material culture that we've seen over the last 60 years has actually stabilized our democratic system, which has consequences in itself for sustainability.
This presentation is brought to you by Arizona State University's Julianne Wrigley Global Institute of Sustainability for educational and non-commercial use only.